Okay, here we go. This is the 17th episode of our podcast, Existential Ambiguity. I think we're going to change the name soon.
Luminous Mind.
Yeah, Luminous Mind is a lot more attractive because it's really what we're working on.
Yeah.
In Luminous Mind, the concept is like a user's guide to the Buddha Dhamma.
It's what shows up after you resolve the existential ambiguity.
Yeah, now that's a good point. Because Wetti Muni's book, now that we've gotten to the end, we're way ahead of where we are in the podcast here, in our studies. And we found that Wetti Muni was unable to resolve the existential ambiguity for himself. And as a consequence, he misunderstands the unbinding of the Buddha and the Arhat to be complete and total annihilation. But the Buddha doesn't support that in his...
So he says that?
Well,
implicitly.
Yeah, he implicitly says that that's it. That's the end of everything. Bye-bye. But the Buddha doesn't say that. The Buddha says he is neither an eternalist nor a nihilationist. He is not in favor of either eternal existence or nihilism.
That's your destruction of existence.
Right. And I think that's very important because when we hear about the annihilation of the ego, the temptation is to think, oh my God, I'm going to go away, Nihilism. Well, it can be pronounced either way, nihilism or nihilism. The rejection of all religious and moral principles, often in the belief that life is meaningless. Philosophy. Extreme skepticism, maintaining that nothing in the world has a real existence. So the Buddha is not a nihilist or nihilist. He is somewhere in the middle path. So what he's really saying when he talks about extinction is that the ego goes away.
Fabrications stop.
Fabrications, right. The false self. The stuff that we make up.
So it's the end of everything we can talk about.
It is. Because all language is based on the assumption of the existence of a self. There's no way around that problem. Because language is not something we have control over. Even if we were to create a new language that didn't have that assumption, then nobody would speak it except us. So it would still be impossible to talk to people about these states of being that don't have I, mine, and self. It's a very difficult problem. Because really what it does is it puts the onus on the people who are coming to the Buddha's teaching to practice it and experience it for themselves.
Yeah, it demands a lot of an individual.
Yeah. And
Can't be a follower.
No, you have to be a doer.
A leader.
A practitioner. Yeah, you have to have initiative. You have at least enough initiative to lead yourself to have some tangible experience of this teaching.
Because people have been indoctrinated for 12 years or more, then they're not able to learn stuff for themselves. They're not able to do systems thinking. That's basically why we're doing this program, to kind of bring out the different elements and make study of the thing easier.
That's a good point. Let's go into that a little bit. We studied a educator named John Taylor Gatto. And Gatto was a teacher in the New York public school system for, I don't know, close to 40 years.
Teacher of the Year in New York 3 times.
Yes. And then they fired him.
After he dropped the bomb on them.
Well, what bomb? He simply went back to the historical records and writings of the people who designed the public school system. And they freely express their motives and purposes, which are
social control,
educate people, or actually train people so that they make efficient workplace robots. That's all.
Nice factory workers, and so that they are not able to learn for themselves, not able to do systems thinking, and
That's right.
And so also so that they don't think outside of the group mind box. Everyone gets to choose their own flavor of thought within the group mind range.
So you can have a group mind of a rock and roller, you can have a group mind of a nerd, you can have a group mind of a stoner, you can have a group mind of a gamer.
Even a rebel punker or a communist, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter because you're playing the same game.
That's right. The rebel communist still buys his beer down at the 7-Eleven, which is run by some huge multinational corporation funded by the bankers and so on. And, subject to their policies and et cetera, and you don't want the guy who is working behind the counter at the 7-Eleven doing systems thinking. So guess what? You put systems thinking in the graduate or even postgraduate educational curriculum, and it just kind of fades away at every lower level, just like ontology, for example.
This is too difficult for people to understand anyway.
That's part of the message of school.
That's what they're saying. We don't agree with that at all.
No, because we find it rather easy and intuitive, actually. Once you get the concept of it, it's no more difficult than geometry.
You can observe different systems everywhere in nature and in society.
But systems thinking is not a desirable skill for a factory worker or an office worker. You don't want them looking around and putting the pieces together and getting the big picture.
In elite schools, they go and they study all the institutional bodies. Like they study how is the military structured, how is government structured, which kind of agencies can you call and ask about to get information, and which strings to pull.
Yeah.
And how does like the internal workings of society, how are they constructed? But you don't learn that in school. You
never hear about that in ordinary school. And you also never get instruction in management principles, project management especially, or debate.
Public speaking or
Public
writing?
speaking, yeah. The kind of writing that you get trained in is just private writing.
Well, you're made to write stuff that you don't care about, so you're taught how to hate writing.
Yes, you're taught how to hate learning by accumulating years and years worth of misunderstood terms and never been given the chance to look them up and clear them.
Misunderstood words and uninteresting, irrelevant subjects.
Oh, and then the message over and over and over again that anything that you come up with is bunk. But you have to learn what these geniuses...
Is wrong or imagination,
Yeah, right. Oh, it's just in your mind. But the thoughts of these great geniuses, the fathers of our country and so on, you have to learn that.
But they're all dead and now everyone's stupid except the experts, so we have to trust them.
Well, that's the thing. The ordinary tools of thinking that were known by people for thousands of years,
Trivium.
Ordinary people, Trivium, for example, and ontology and so many other things, have been deliberately removed from the ordinary grade school curriculum.
Not because they came up with a better alternative.
No, but because they don't want you to know those things.
What do you think? Assimilating facts are a better way of learning than learning how to reason for yourself with how grammar, logic, and rhetoric, how language is constructed and how you use it to find truth and stuff like that.
Semantics, how language is constructed, why words mean what they mean, the meaning of meaning, and so on like that.
How is that inferior to assimilating data that you don't really care about and you're never going to use?
It's not inferior. In fact, it's quite superior.
Yeah.
Real learning means acquiring skills, practical skills that you can use in life. But, oh no, we can't have kids apprenticing to people who know what they're doing. We have to have kids being taught all day what to think by a loser who can't even get a job in a corporate environment because their grades are too low. The scores of teachers on the graduate record exam are the lowest of any profession except school administrators.
The people who tell teachers what to do.
That's right. So the people who tell the teachers what to do are even stupider than the teachers who are stupider than any other occupational class of graduate students. Does that tell you something, people? That is a system that is designed to fail. And is designed to make you fail. And if you allow the school system to dictate your education, you're not going to get one.
Should be fairly obvious once you hear it.
Well, once you hear it, once you see it, it's a matter of context. We have a saying, the context is decisive. Decisive in what? In determining the meaning of an experience. If you hold your experience of school in the context of learning,
doesn't make any sense.
Oh, no, it doesn't make sense at all. It's a horrible example of learning. But if you hold your school experience in the context of being socially conditioned, then, the light goes on.
That's why.
Yes, that's what it really means.
That's why the teacher didn't even believe me when I wrote that really good essay.
That's right. That's why they accused you of cheating, plagiarizing, wasn't it?
Yeah. They didn't have any evidence, but they still accused me of that.
Because it was too good.
Yeah, it was too good. Shortly after that, I dropped out of
just like they punished me in the 4th grade for using a slide rule. I taught myself how to use the slide rule, and this was viewed as cheating. I said, no, this isn't cheating. This is advanced college level work. You know, the engineering students in college are allowed to use a slide rule, so why shouldn't I? But no, we can't have that. We can't have people going out and learning things on their own. That would just upset the whole system.
Yes, that's right.
So anyway, we are stuck with intellectually crippled population. And this is going on all over the world.
They don't have to be. They can learn these things, but they're stuck in the paradigm that they're stupid.
Why? Because they don't have enough initiative to take responsibility for their own education and go beyond what they were trained in school and find out things for themselves. They have lost their taste for learning, and that's really tragic.
Yes. But they kind of, they accepted that, you know, they're stupid because they're lazy.
Well, that's what we were taught.
Yeah.
We're taught that, first of all, you belong to a class. And then next thing is you have a permanent identity, a permanent record that travels with you for your whole life. You can't change. You are this person forever.
I believed that for a long time. until about that time when I was accused of cheating on that test.
Yeah.
I started like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Your school record has nothing to do with who you are or what you can become, what you can make of yourself if you have sufficient initiative.
You got a couple of really decent jobs without a formal education in some fields, didn't you?
I had a couple of great jobs in technical writing and management, project management, and a couple of other jobs in the music field, production, video production, creative advertising, creative work, and stuff like that, without any training whatsoever in those fields. And I beat out guys who had 4-year degrees in those subjects.
Yeah.
Because I could think. I could think, and I could be creative, and I could come up with stuff that was outside the box, because nobody had ever told me that there was a box.
So while the other ones were like thinking inside this paradigm, you were like totally outside it. They were just assimilating facts,
right,
of what you could do,
right, or what has been done by the quote experts.
Well, you went and studied, like you made.
I just looked at the thing itself.
Yeah.
I just looked at the thing itself and said, what is this? What is its structure? How does it work? What can you do with it? You know, and not try to be held back by all these previous examples. In fact, I would just ignore the previous examples and I would look at the thing itself and play with it. And when you do that, new stuff happens.
Yes.
And that's the secret of creativity, is to not know what other people have done, but just look into the thing itself and play with it.
With fresh eyes.
Yeah.
That's the basis of, that's the foundation of invention and innovation.
That's what we're doing with Buddhism, or I should say, Buddha's teaching. Because one of the results that we found very early on is that most of what is taught under the heading of Buddhism isn't Buddha's teaching. It's somebody else's idea of Buddha's teaching. And here we go again. Some expert a long time ago wrote this big, thick book, and now everybody's vision of what Buddha's teaching is conditioned by what's in that book.
Now everyone is beating each other over the head with this big book.
That's right. Instead of Bible-pounding Baptists, we have Pitaka-pounding pundits. So, you know, the whole thing is being held back, and we see it degenerating before our very eyes. The monks now, in where we are in Sri Lanka, and before when we were in Thailand, the monks are like second, third, even fourth class people. You know, they don't
have any interest in what they're doing at all most of the time.
It's just a vocation for them. It's just a way to get by. It's easier than working for a living or educating yourself to have a career. What to speak of running your own business. That's work.
Being a monk would be a great opportunity to really study deeply some.
Yeah, but we see they're not studying. They don't have the curiosity to study. They simply repeat the suttas like a parrot and then go to the rituals and repeat the chants and prayers and bow down when they're supposed to bow down and whatever, and then go to lunch. That's really about it. And they just, maintain the temples and like that, maintain the institution. But the institution is gradually going downhill.
Yeah. Of course, there are exceptions to the rules, but that's the general trend.
Yeah, the trend. We are fortunate we know some monks who are more intelligent than that. But they're few and far between. So it really comes down to the consciousness of the individual. You know, if the individual wants to learn, wants to expand their knowledge, wants to acquire skills, not just learn words and knowledge. You know, we could get out the thesaurus here and start throwing around big words, and it would sound really impressive, you know. And we could adopt a sanctimonious, tone. Where's that whiskey? We could invoke, the academic mood here and impress everybody, but nobody would learn anything.
No.
Instead, what we want to do is apply the same individualistic, direct, consciousness-based experience to the Buddha's teaching and see what comes out of that. And so far, what's come out of it has been very interesting.
Yeah.
For example, we have found that the Western philosophy of existentialism is perhaps the best approach to the Buddha's teaching that we have found. In fact, it's much better insofar as the results than the traditional religious approach that we find in the East.
Yeah.
Because the religious approach discourages direct personal observation and inquiry. But existentialism encourages it.
Yes.
Phenomenology. It means looking into things for yourself, seeing how they affect your experience directly. So consciousness is one of those things. It's another one of those things that's relegated to grad school. And if you read the Western literature on consciousness, you'll go unconscious.
A lot of speculation.
Total speculation. It's just ridiculous. It's completely useless for any practical purpose whatsoever. The Buddha doesn't make a big deal out of consciousness. He says there's basically 6 kinds of consciousness based on the 6 senses, which are sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the mind.
So you have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, and so on.
Yeah. Consciousness is never just free-floating. There's no such thing as pure consciousness or consciousness without connection to some object. So consciousness is always consciousness of something.
Yes.
I'm not even going to read the definition of consciousness in the Western dictionary because it's nonsense.
Yes. So the consciousness, when people say consciousness of without an object, they really mean consciousness of a really subtle object.
Well, like consciousness of the mind, for example. A consciousness of space or consciousness of emptiness or something like that.
Maybe you can even have consciousness of one-pointed concentration.
Well,
concentrate in one spot.
That's putting the cart before the horse. That would because one-pointed concentration is a form of awareness.
The function of consciousness.
And yes, consciousness is actually a rather low-level phenomenon. It's tied directly to the 6 senses. Okay? In other words, if you want to make something out of your consciousness, then you can put more processing on top of that. And that's awareness. Remember, going back to the definition of sati sampajanya, it's a recollected state of consciousness. Awareness, sati sampajanya means right awareness.
Or mindful awareness.
Mindfulness, yeah. And so it's a recollected type of consciousness where you have in mind your purpose, your goals, the mechanism, the teaching, and how to put together the various impressions into some pattern that will help you advance in spiritual life.
At the same time when your experience is showing up.
That's right. It's reflexion with an X, not reflection of past and future events. It's happening all right now in the present.
And it's not the putujanus reflexion of the story of I, but it's a systematic thinking of the processes that are going on.
Yes, an awareness of the process of how the I and mine is developed. And by putting awareness into that process, it just naturally unmocks. Okay? So, this is a good place to take up the narrative in Wetimuni's book. Because he says, where we left off, he says, since consciousness is negative regarding essence, it is always associated with the body.
What does that mean, negative regarding essence?
Well, let's look up essence. The intrinsic nature or indispensable quality of something, especially something abstract, that determines its character. In philosophy, a property or group of properties of something without which it would not exist or be what it is.
Huh.
Okay? So negative regarding essence means it doesn't have any independent existence.
Huh.
It's not a thing. It's a process. And a process depends on some relationship between things.
I was going to ask you to look up negative also, because many people have the opinion that negative is something negative, something bad. Here is negative in the positive.
The very first definition of negative is consisting in or characterized by the absence rather than the presence of distinguishing features.
Huh.
Consciousness has no distinguishing features. It's like a mirror. It doesn't have any qualities of its own. It only reflects the qualities of the things it's in touch with.
Huh.
And what are they? The six sense media. Okay? And the, what are we talking about here? The, remind me of what we're doing here. The five clinging aggregates.
Yes.
Okay? The aggregates and the senses. That's what consciousness is consciousness of. So therefore, it is always associated with the body and the senses. In the words of the Buddha, etta sita etta patibaddha. Fastened there, bound there. Etta means there. And sita means fastened. Patibaddha means bound. And that's from the Mahasakuludai Sutta. He also says in the suttas, Saviññānaka kaya, body endowed with consciousness. Sa means with, viññāya means consciousness, and kaya means body.
Yes.
And that's from the Radha Sutta. So, normal experience, Weti Muni goes on. He says, normal experience, however, is multiple. There are hearing, seeing, etc., the six sense media. Experience is not confined to one sense or faculty. So we can distinguish six kinds of consciousness arising dependent on six bases. Salayatana. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then here's a nice long quote from the other one, the same sutta, the Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta. Monks, whatever consciousness arises dependent upon, by that it is reckoned. Well, that's very Pali-esque. If I were to put that into a better English, I would say, consciousness is reckoned by whatever it arises dependent on. Okay? So then he goes on to explain. Consciousness arising dependent on the eye and sight is reckoned as eye consciousness. Consciousness arising dependent upon the ear and sound is reckoned as ear consciousness. Consciousness arising dependent upon the nose and odor is reckoned as nose consciousness. Consciousness arising dependent upon the tongue and taste is reckoned as tongue consciousness. Consciousness arising dependent upon the body and touch is reckoned as body consciousness. Consciousness arising dependent upon the mind and mental images is reckoned as mind consciousness. So you have three things. Here we are back to ontology again. To have consciousness, you have to have three things. You have to have a sense object, and the relationship between them, which is consciousness. Consciousness cannot exist without both these other things.
You have to have both the I and the object the I is aware of for consciousness to be there.
Yes. In fact, the I is manufactured from the consciousness of the sense object.
Yes.
Okay, as we went over before in
we start
the
recognizing
chapter
what we
4.
are conscious of. And the root structure starts.
The root structure, right. The root structure means I take whatever object I'm conscious conscious of, and then I invest
Perceive
it.
and
I
then conceive.
Conceive in it, this I and mine and all this stuff.
Huh.
So each of the 6 sense bases is described as that thing which is, as the Buddha says, lokasmim lokasani hoti lokamani, in the world, and by which there is world perceiving and world conceiving.
I was lucky with that one.
Huh?
Just repeated what I said there.
Yeah. In other words, we create our world by how we sense it, how we see it, our consciousness of the world. Without consciousness, there is no world. When a person is knocked out, they're nowhere.
They're past the dream room.
Yeah, they're gone. So when we have consciousness, we create the world that we live in. Another person can be standing right next to us and seeing the very same thing, but they will see it in a different way and give a different meaning to it, and for them they might as well be in a different world.
Yeah.
Because they see it so differently.
Yeah. I remember the example from the Vedas. Someone was looking at the statue of Krishna and crying, and full of transcendental ecstasy. And the next person was standing there bored looking at his watch.
That wasn't from the Vedas. That's from my personal experience. When I was a priest in the temple, one day this Indian couple came to visit. And she was like standing in front of the deity in awe and just, getting all bhava and worked up and crying. And he's looking at his watch. When are we going to go home? So this is going on.
Yeah, she would, in this context, she would have a very refined form of suffering, and he would have a coarse one.
Yeah. His suffering is, when are we going to get home so we can have sense enjoyment?
Yeah. Craving for non-being.
Yeah, right.
She was trying to maintain her being.
And she was in an exalted state of being with some spiritual emotions. Okay? It's still being.
Yes.
It's still the existence of a self.
Even the bliss of jhanas are being. We want to go even beyond that.
Yes. And so the thing is, we don't find very often that a person can approach the really exalted states of non-being without going through some kind of approach to it. And that approach consists in creating very exalted states of being.
And being disenchanted with them.
Yes. Right. Seeing that the statue of the god has feet of clay.
Like, ho-hum, now I've been swimming in the river of bliss for weeks. It's like it's becoming kind of stale.
No, you actually see that that's suffering. Like when I was
read in
in
Dharmasār that you give up joy first because you see that happiness is a more refined feeling than joy. So you let go of joy and then you get latch on to happiness.
Right, and that goes all the way up to the 4th jhana of
let go of happiness.
Total emptiness. And then you see that even perception of total emptiness is a disturbance. And that puts you in a position to say, okay, so I've got to get rid of the one who is perceiving, the I. That's the only place you can go from there.
Yeah.
Because to go anywhere else would be a step back,
a
step down, and you just can't make yourself do that. So the person who sees that even the most refined states of consciousness are actually suffering, they're in a position to actually give them up. Not the person who is still hung up on relishing them.
In the end, even the most subtle feeling of happiness is still a disturbance of the mind.
That's right. In fact, what was that? Oh, I came across a wonderful quote on that. Someone was asking Sariputta, saying that, enlightenment is supposed to be the highest bliss and the greatest enjoyment. But then you say that there's no feeling in happiness, in enlightenment. So how is that possible? And Sariputta says, it is exactly in the fact that there is no feeling in enlightenment that there is enjoyment. That enjoyment is a feeling of relief.
Yes.
You know, just like right now you're scratching your mosquito bites, right?
Getting some temporary relief.
Temporary relief. But imagine if there were no mosquito bites, no feeling of itching, no feeling of irritation at all. Then not only you wouldn't have to scratch, but there wouldn't be any feeling or sensation whatsoever. And that would be a relief. So imagine if all feeling and cessation, if all feeling were to cease.
All disturbance.
Yes. Even consciousness.
You become,
Because the consciousness we have now is always consciousness based on I. And
we're
that means,
burdened by this structure.
yeah, God, we have to maintain this thing, you know. And it's a huge effort. So, let's see. Let's go on here. Thus, the I can be described as that spherical organ in the world by which there is seeing, sight perception of the world, and conceiving of the world. The ear can be described as a membranous organ by which there is hearing, sound perception of the world, and conceiving of the world. And the tongue, nose, and body can be similarly described. And the mind, mano, can be described as that organ, principally the gray matter of the brain, by which there is imagining, idea perception or mental image perception of the world and conceiving of the world. Detailed physiological descriptions are unnecessary. The functional descriptions given in the suttas are quite sufficient. And this brings up a very important point, that the Buddha's teaching is not, nor is it meant to be, a comprehensive metaphysical description of the world. Maybe some people try to make it into that, particularly the commentators.
Many do that, but it's actually just a cure for the disease.
Yeah, we used this example before. If you have a disease, the doctor is going to tell you enough, whatever you need to know to treat that disease and get rid of it. He's not going to tell you things that are unnecessary.
If he's a good doctor.
Yeah, he's not going to waste his time or your time. Doctors have precious little time to waste these days. So they keep their interactions with you to the really necessary things. And the same with the Buddha. The Buddha, he's trying to clear out this disease of ego, false personality, self. And so he's giving us just the basic information on consciousness, on the sense bases, on the mind, and so on, that enables us to clear out this disease. He's not trying to give us a comprehensive description of the cosmos.
Or tell us what to do.
Right, that's not necessary. He's telling us in certain circumstances you have to refrain from doing certain things. Like when you first start out in this path, you have to follow these precepts. And there's 10 precepts that are prominent. But these are going to be automatic once you get to the point of seeing how the ego works.
They are simply to remove the gross disturbance of the mind. And then the more subtle disturbance of the mind show up, and then you start dealing with that.
In fact, it's good. Just like if a person, let's say, is recovering from a disease, the doctor might tell him, okay, I know you love to go hiking, but you can't go hiking now because it's going to use up too much energy. You're not going to be able to recover as well from the disease. In fact, it might even give you a relapse or something like that. But once the disease is finished, then go hiking all you want because now you're healthy. No problem. So it's the same with the Buddha's teaching. There are some moral strictures. Now some people get all hung up on the precepts because In the Buddha's day and time, the monks had to be very strict. There were many other monks from other disciplines and teachings who were competing with them. Okay, and any little fault that they had would have been used for the advantage of by these other monks.
Would be a stain on the Sangha.
Yes,
But
right.
these days the Sangha is all stains.
Yeah, the Sangha is really in sad shape today. So what to speak of 227 precepts? It's hard to get the monks even to follow the 10 basic ones. So anyway, these prohibitions are necessary only for the purpose of treating the disease.
Yes.
There's no morality, quote unquote, based on, the judgment of some God sitting in the heavens. It sounds like people are blowing up rocks next door.
Sound like God struck someone down with his thumb.
Oh God! God.
But the monks aren't able to follow those rules because they don't have a picture of why they're doing it. They're doing it because of tradition, not because of removing gross disturbance
And this is why the religious approach to the Buddha's teaching is breaking down. Because nobody understands the philosophy.
No.
Therefore, they don't see why they should do like this and do like that. Or not do, as the case may be. The thing is, the existential approach is much better because the existential approach puts you in a position of having to ask these awkward questions. Like, what am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose of existence?
You become a scientist in your own lab, and then you see how exposing yourself to gross disturbance affects your view.
And these questions are also a form of disturbance because they are obvious questions. They are essential questions. And they're also unanswerable questions.
In words. Unanswerable in words.
Well, unanswerable in the sense that they all depend on the assumption of a self, a permanent entity.
So they're invalid.
Yes. The Buddha refused to answer those questions. He said, those questions are invalid, sorry. I'm not going to answer them. You're out of luck.
Speculating about them will make you crazy, even.
Yes, it will.
But asking them is essential.
Yeah.
Being aware of the problem.
Right. If you become aware of the problem, then you're going to realize, oh, I have to do something about this.
And it ain't thinking about it.
No. And the Buddha's teaching then comes essential. You see, here's somebody who dealt with this question, and not in a philosophical way, not by thinking about it, but by meditation and insight. These are fundamentally different from thinking. Now, I'm going to try to finish up this section, and then we can begin on the next section, the next episode, which is going to be a couple of days because we have to do some traveling. But the description of the mind base appears insufficient and inadequate because although there can be no hearing based on the eye base or seeing based on the ear base, etc., there can be a sort of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching based on the mind base. Okay? In other words, the senses are not interchangeable, but the mind appears to be.
Because of perception's memory.
Yes. Based on the mind base, there can be imaginary sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. From this point of view, the mind base can be thought of as incorporating 5 imaginary bases, in which 5 kinds of imaginary perceptions can arise. However, some exclusively mental phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, retrocognition, precognition, etc. may not conform entirely to this scheme. But you know what? We don't need to have a scheme. We're not trying to establish a comprehensive ontology.
No, and we don't really need to speculate about telepathy or clairvoyance.
No, because those are distractions on the path.
They might show up on the way, but they're not really what we're concerned with.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I think people have experiences of these things all the time. But they tend to deny them because, again, they have been trained that whatever shows up in your mind isn't important.
No,
it's not valuable.
But if you, like telepathy, if your ego is out of the way, if you're in the selfless state, you'll pick up on the frequency of all the other people, and it will be obvious what they're thinking about.
Of course, yeah. Just by their expression. Even if you don't speak their language, just their body language is enough.
Yeah. How they don't answer the question.
Thus, considering all 6 sense bases, we have consciousness defined in the suttas as follows. Monks, what is consciousness, vijnana? It is these 6 consciousness bodies or consciousness groups. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. This, monks, is called consciousness. This is from the Upadana Paripavatta Sutta. So the earlier phrase, body endowed with consciousness, can now be expanded to 6-based body endowed with consciousness. Saviññānika Salayatanikaya Kaya. Okay. So consciousness, therefore, in Buddhism is a very simple matter because it's not viewed as either absolute or transcendental or mystical.
It's phenomenological.
Yeah. I experience consciousness whenever my senses contact some of its objects. That's all. Simple. Okay?
Once you hear it and try to see it, it becomes obvious, but before that you were so caught up in your story that you weren't aware of how the process was going on.
Well, speaking of story, there is one point I want to make about the nature of consciousness before we get into the next section. And that is consciousness and fabrications, or consciousness and determinations are like a feedback loop.
Yes.
In the process of dependent origination. We'll get to dependent origination in a later section and go through it in detail. But I just want to mention that we can be conscious of only that which we recognize. Okay? Or I should say we can be aware of only that which we recognize. We can be conscious of something, but if we don't recognize it, we're liable to just throw it in the trash.
Yeah. Just passes us by without us recognizing it.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't even there.
You know, it's like when you're out in the woods and you hear a bird call of a certain bird, you know. You hear it, but if you don't know that bird, you don't know anything about it, you don't recognize it. It goes, as they say, in one ear and out the other.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about your story, you might not even hear the bird.
Yeah, right. Oh, it's like I got to make it to the highway in time to catch the bus.
But it's really interesting that fabrications or determinations, they're kind of the maze that the eye travels in.
Yes.
And they control what you're conscious of.
Yeah, because we determine this is good, this is bad, and everything else is just useless.
Irrelevant.
Yeah. And so we trash it. We throw it away. If it's not related to my story, either positively or negatively, it's junk.
So we throw 99% of the experience out the window.
That's right. And then we wonder why we're bored, why life seems dull. Why our experience seems attenuated and not at all intense.
Attenuated?
Attenuated means like turned down. Turned down, like you turn down the volume on the speaker or something. Let's see. Attenuation. Attenuate. Reduce the effect, value, or force of something. Reduce the amplitude of. Huh?
So when you reduce the volume of your speakers, you attenuate them.
That's right. You attenuate the volume. You attenuate the signal. When you attenuate your consciousness by throwing out most of your experience, because it's not relative to I.
Yeah, focusing on the perception or determination.
Then your experience becomes dull. It becomes attenuated, turned down in volume, in amplitude, reduced in amplitude, as they say here.
And instead you're thinking about what you wish you would experience.
Yeah, or thinking about what you did experience and whether it was good or bad.
Yeah.
So people get caught up in reflection. And reflection is out of present time. If you look at our recent video, you see a diagram where reflection is portrayed as being more aware of the past and future than of the present.
Yeah. That's when stuff hits people in the face, because...
Well, yeah, don't try this on a busy street corner. You're trying to cross the street. You better be aware of the present moment.
Many people do this while driving a car, and they think about all kinds of stuff. And you know, the body is on automatic and can control the car, but your reaction time slows way down.
So if anything unexpected happens, you're toast.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about life. Though most of life is routine. And we make it that way. We make it that way for convenience, for comfort, right? But by doing that, we also cut down our awareness. We make things duller than they even are, you know. And life in general is lots and lots of boring routine, punctuated by moments of extreme experience. So once we have a feeling of how much of our experience we throw away unnecessarily, we can get back a lot of vitality in life simply by getting rid of our stories.
Being here and now is an extreme experience.
Yes, it really is a very intense experience. And this is how you experience the fullness of life, the magic of life, the intensity of life is there at every moment. The rasa, as we call it, the taste, the bhava of life is there in every moment if you approach life with intense awareness.
Yes.
There's something beautiful or striking or amazing in every moment. But it requires that kind of childlike openness without a bunch of stories, without a bunch of ideas about who I am.
Yeah.
And
without our jaded eyes, then experience becomes jaded.
We don't need to put all those conditions on our experience. We can look at things the way they are.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we do that ostensibly to avoid suffering. That's the ironic thing about it.
Try to get away from experience.
Yeah, we say, well, experience sometimes gives me suffering. So I will only be aware when this kind of experience that gives me happiness comes around.
The rest of the time I'm going to think about that experience.
Yes, and then be dull.
Chase it.
So, you know, these all are very inefficient strategies for coping with the reality of life. The reality of life is as long as there is I, there is suffering. That's it, straight from the Buddha's mouth.
And when you get those things that the I is struggling for, it's not what it's cut out to.
Never. When you finally get that new Lexus, there's always going to be some problem with it. You have to take it back and get it fixed.
Same with the new wife.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's no place you can take them to get fixed. Better to be a monk.
Yes.
Okay, we've gone over time as usual. What the heck? Today's kind of a quiet, rainy day, here anyway. And we're going on the road for a couple of days. So next episode will probably be on the weekend. And thanks for listening. We hope you found it interesting and helpful. And we'll talk to you again next time.